Well, thanks so much, Ryan. Appreciate it. Thanks, everybody, for attending. We have yet another great edition lined up for you all. Hopefully the next 45 minutes or so you'll get a lot out of. Of course, we love to do these kinds of things and show off what we've learned in the past month or two and bring in some experts and specialists from outside as well. We really, we know that we are always wanting to advance our knowledge and bring in other experts outside of the company as well as the Hacking Exposed friends and family. So it's great to have Bikash Barai on the line as well. And of course, Gary Golomb. Gary, who works here at Cylance, has been an integral part of the company ever since its very early days. And he continues to just blow me away every time I turn around and get a good talk with him about just about any topic. So let's talk about Hacking Exposed, the webinar, and just in general, and then we'll get things kicked off. So a couple of reminders. We do take topic requests, so if you ever have any ideas, in fact, this came up as an idea a while ago that we had put in the queue, which is, all right, so we know the industry has a lot of flaws, not just regular products, right? Microsoft Word and Adobe and Apple and things of that nature, but also the security industry itself and the security products that the industry creates. So how can we quantify that? How can we really describe and show and demonstrate those flaws? And so we have Bikash, who's going to do a little bit of talking there and give a little bit of background about the vulnerabilities that are being found in those current technologies and solutions. And then I have Gary, who honestly, I just love to listen to him when it comes to some of these topics, because he can always teach me a bunch of stuff around how the latest and greatest technologies are being bypassed in the field. And taking from our forensics teams and our IR teams all of the work and effort that they collect and the artifacts and evidence that they collect, and really make sense of it at a very technical level to get to true root cause analysis, because at the end of the day, if you can't determine why the bad guy get in, you can never really prevent them from getting in again. And so I'm going to have Gary talk about why current security solutions fail, and he's going to talk about digital artifact collection. All right, so with that, let me turn everything over to Bikash. And Bikash, are you there?
Absolutely. So thanks a lot, Stuart. Thank you, Gary. Today, let me start with a brief on myself and a little bit about the company I represent, and then I'll move on and discuss more on the vulnerabilities which are there in the security products. So that's going to be the primary thing which I'll be talking about. I'll discuss on a few examples of vulnerabilities in security products, and then talk about the trends which we see in the industry in terms of how the vulnerabilities are kind of rising, or is it going down? What are the type of vulnerabilities specific to the security products? So a quick background about myself. I'm the CEO and co-founder of iViz, and iViz is into cloud-based application penetration testing with some 400 customers, funded by IDG Ventures, part of Gartner Hype Cycle, etc. On the other side, about myself, I love artificial intelligence, entrepreneurship, and a little bit of magic and mind reading. So back to the topic, let's first start with a few examples of vulnerabilities in security products. As we all are aware of, that any product could have vulnerability, but still we somehow inherently kind of trust the security products. So let's look into how do the security products fare when it comes to security itself. How secure are the security products? So let's take the example of Symantec email appliance 9.5.x, and this is something which was discovered by a guy called Brian Smith, and he presented it in Black Hat. So if you just look at this single appliance, the number of vulnerabilities which were detected were like standard stored excesses, plus the reflected excesses. Also, there are vulnerabilities like SSH with backdoor user account, and not just that, you can actually do privilege escalation and get the root. Then there was a vulnerability related to the attacker being able to modify the web application itself. So this is more related to the appliance. Let's move on to the next one, which is the Trend Micro's appliance. So it's a similar product like that of Symantec, and very interestingly or uninterestingly, we got exactly similar type of vulnerabilities again, like XSS vulnerabilities, cross-site request forgery, blind LDAP injection. So all these standard type of vulnerabilities which we test and see in the non-security products were exactly present in the appliance of both Symantec and Trend Micro. And I think that's very scary. Since we are part of the security industry, it's our responsibility that we should build more secure products, whereas it's not the case. Let's look into the other very interesting example. This is from last year, 2012, and my report on the vulnerability trends in security products is also for the year 2012, which will come up later. So this is related to Microsoft auto-update hijacking. So I believe many of you will be remembering the MD5 collision attack, which was discovered, I believe, in 2008, where we could see that you can create your own pair of the private key and the certificate, which will generate exactly the same MD5 sum. So using that, you could easily trick trick any authentication system, and you could create counterfeit certificate and sign the code such that the malware appears to be like a genuine Microsoft code. So this is one very interesting example. And by the way, Flame utilized this to sign the malware using it. So the next vulnerability is about the pre-boot authentication attack. So this is a little bit old, but this is something which we worked on ourselves at iViz. So we, in fact, presented it in DEF CON. So what we discovered was that many of these pre-boot authentication software, they were actually storing the pre-boot authentication password in the memory, and after that they were not removing it from the memory. And typically from the user land, quite obviously you can't go and access the this part of the RAM, but then we figured out a way to go away from the protected mode to the real mode, and then steal the password from there. And by doing so, we could actually break several of this pre-boot authentication software like BitLocker, TrueCrypt, McAfee SafeBoot, and we discovered vulnerabilities in HP BIOS, Intel BIOS, and several others. So it's the same philosophy, but we could use the same philosophy to break multiple products. The next one, we thought, again, we did this a little bit of research within iViz. We thought of checking out how good are the antivirus products. So we did not see too many vulnerabilities in the antivirus products, so we thought let's try this out, and we got few of these antivirus products and started fuzzing them, and we were trying to check out what kind of malformed input files which you can give it to them, and whether they're handling those malformed compressed, packed, and binary files in the proper manner. And when we tried fuzzing them, we saw that we could get crashes for AVG, Sophos, and multiple antivirus. So basically, we discovered numerous zero-day vulnerabilities and the exploits. And in fact, not just crashes, we could figure out vulnerabilities where we could do arbitrary code execution. So the next slide is on a few more vulnerabilities in the antivirus. For example, the gzip file parser in AVG or in Fortinet, etc., allows remote attackers to bypass malware detection via tar.gz file. So we needed to make some modification to bypass that, and there are several other bypassing mechanisms. Similarly, there were certain other DOS vulnerabilities which are discovered in antivirus products. So I remember one of the companies from Germany, they actually at one point of time claimed to have discovered some hundreds of vulnerabilities in antivirus products. I don't think everything got into the CVE, etc., but they claimed it. And I believe the iViz are definitely one of the low-hanging fruits when it comes to fuzzing and discovering vulnerabilities in them. A few more examples of vulnerabilities in VPN products. So it's obviously similar in nature when it comes to the technical nature. Like for example, Cisco AnyConnect. In that case, you could actually there's a vulnerability related to arbitrary code execution. There's another format string vulnerability which was in the VPN in Apple iOS, which you could execute through a crafted Raccoon configuration file. So these are very standard type of vulnerabilities which we see in any other product, and exactly those vulnerabilities are there in the security products as well. And this is no real big surprise. The only issue probably is that we somehow trust the security products more since they are labeled as security products. So let's move on to the report which we released last week on the vulnerability statistics and the vulnerability trends in the security products. So every year what we do is we consider CVE and CPE and NVD. We consider these three database, and we do an analysis and figure out the vulnerability trends specific to the security products. So let's look at the key findings. So what we noticed was that the CAGR, the growth rate for the vulnerabilities in the security products for last 3 years had been 37.29%. In fact, the growth rate is more than the growth rate in the rest of the products. Antivirus accounts for 49% of the vulnerabilities among all the security products. So that looks like the lowest hanging fruit. Next comes the firewall. The top 3 security vendors with maximum vulnerabilities are McAfee, Cisco, and followed by Symantec. The top 3 security products with maximum vulnerabilities are Rising Global's antivirus, Cisco's adaptive security appliance, and Icarus. We also saw that access control is the most prominent weakness in security products, and SQL injection is the least found among the security products. And that's probably obvious because not too many security products are using the web-based interfaces, etc. So that could be the reason. So let's look at the trend. So on the left-hand side, you can see the trend of vulnerabilities in all the products. So if you just look at the trend, it went up and then went down a little bit, and again from 2012, there's a little bit of a pattern in terms of rising. Exactly this similar pattern is observed in the security products as well, with the difference that in 2012 we see a sharp rise, and this rise is more than the standard rise if you consider the correlation coefficient between all products and the security products. So I think the security products are being more targeted right now, and probably there's a lot more vulnerabilities which are discovered but not yet disclosed, because a vulnerability in a security product, if you get that, that's a high value thing. You can sell it in the zero-day black market at a lot higher price. So lots of those vulnerabilities don't get disclosed. So to the next slide, let's look at the vulnerability by the product types. So here we can see amazingly 50%, almost 50% of the vulnerabilities which are there in the security products just belong to the antivirus. So antivirus is probably one of the first security products, and that got the most number of vulnerabilities. And this is just for 2012. If we see the same pie chart, cumulative for last 10 years, we still see antivirus as the highest. So antivirus somehow maintained the #1 position over the last decade, always consistently. Next comes the firewall, and after that the IDS, IPS, VPN, and others. Now let's look at the vulnerabilities by the vendors. So in the left-hand side, you can see the cumulative over last 10, 12 years, and the right-hand side is for 2012. So what we can see is in 2012, the leaders in terms of number of vulnerabilities disclosed are Cisco, Symantec, McAfee, Trend Micro, Kaspersky. Now, even though the number of vulnerabilities are more in this case, we need to consider that many of these companies have more products compared to the other single-point solution products, single-point solution companies. So this number being more does not necessarily mean that they are the most vulnerable companies. So this is just the number. We probably need to check the vulnerability density in each of these products of each of these companies, and we'll come to that in the next slide. So moving on to the next slide. So here you can see the number of vulnerabilities which were discovered in 2012 among the different specific security products. And here you can see we did not do a ordering as such, but you can see like WebSense products or the Panda security products or several other products like IBM Rational App Scan, which does application scanning. So many of these individual products has got huge number of vulnerabilities which got discovered and got published. The next slide is on the comparative analysis between the vulnerabilities in the security products and the other products in terms of the vulnerability types. So here we can see a few interesting things. Like for example, the SQL injection is more, it's more predominant in the other products and very few occurrences in the security products. Same with excesses is lower in case of the security products. Whereas the access control vulnerabilities and the input validation vulnerabilities are a lot higher in case of the security products. So this is a very interesting thing to observe. And I believe these numbers are going to change over time because many of these security products are right now going on the web. So they're becoming a lot more web-enabled. So the nature of vulnerabilities will change. Like what you saw in case of Symantec and Trend Micro appliances, those vulnerabilities are standard with application vulnerabilities. And I'm really amazed why Trend Micro or Symantec did not test for those vulnerabilities. And because those are so standard vulnerabilities, you just do a standard pen test and you'll get all of them. You just use a normal scanner and you can get those. So I believe there's going to be a kind of change in the nature of this distribution of vulnerabilities over time. But right now, this is how it looks like. So let's move on to the next slide on a few predictions, what I believe the future is going to look like. So firstly, there's no doubt that the security products are high payoff targets since they're present in the most of the systems. So the reason why Microsoft got kind of attacked the most and they got the most number of vulnerabilities is not just because they're insecure or they had vulnerabilities, but it is also because they are popular. So since they're popular, they are attacked the most. The same is true for the security products. And now with Microsoft and other companies getting more and more secure, I think many of these not so secure security products are going to get hit. The second thing is the attacks on the security products. I mean, just kind of as a continuation of what I was saying, attacks on the security products and on the security companies are going to rise. The APT and cyber warfare market makes security products as one of the top choices because that's very, very interesting. And the majority of the vulnerabilities discovered will not be made public in future because these are going to be sold in the black market in the hands of the APT actors. So that's what I believe is going to be the trend. Now, in terms of considering the current situation, what can we do to protect ourselves? So what I'm going to say is not something completely new, and this is what I kind of believe is being 100% secure is obviously not possible. Security problem is very much like the happiness problem. You cannot have the perfect solution for happiness. You cannot be always happy. So you can't always be secure. But then you can be more happy or less happy as a person, and similarly you can be more secure or less secure. So in order to have a kind of better security, what can we do? Let's talk about that. One is, from the security product perspective, we can't trust the security products. This is very important, and somehow we are inherently kind of trained to believe that the security products are secure. I mean, I don't mean for all the security guys, but in general. So I think this needs to change. We need to conduct proper due diligence of the security products. You need to ask the vendor, give me the last penetration testing report of your security product. How frequently do you conduct penetration testing? And not just that, you might yourself want to conduct a penetration testing on the security product. The next thing is, we should patch the security product like any other product. So typically we patch the operating system, but then we need to patch everything. Like we should patch Microsoft Office, the Adobe Acrobat, and along with that, the security products. The next thing is, we should treat the security tools in the similar manner as any other tools during the threat modeling. And that will give you the true picture. And finally, just the security tools quite obviously are not enough. So we need a really good multi-layered defense. If it is really very critical, you can't depend on a single system. You need to have multiple systems. So you need a multi-layered defense mechanism. You need a strong detection mechanism, a strong monitoring mechanism, and extremely important, a very strong response mechanism. Because whatever you do, there could always be a scenario where things might go wrong. So how do we respond to that? So that will be, in short, at a very high level, what we could do about it. And I'd like to thank all of you. And I'll pass on to Stuart and move on to the next speaker. And towards the end of the conversation, we'll get into the Q&A.
Thanks, Bikash. Yeah, we'll have a Q&A at the very end. You guys feel free to start lobbing in those questions now, and we'll start to review them as we get closer to the end. But I think, a few takeaways for me, Bikash. I mean, number one, security products are not immune, obviously, to a lot of security vulnerabilities, and a big focus is, it sounds like it's starting to come back into security products. There was a big push for a while, and but based on your chart, it looks like we've kind of lulled a bit in terms of our focus for finding vulnerabilities in those products. But at the end of the day, they are no different than every other product. They're going to be designed and built by humans, and we are flawed, and we're going to create these flaws inside the products, and they're going to get executed. It'll be interesting to see how much of a black market. I know there is a black market today for a lot of these vulnerabilities, but to me, it has not been as prolific as Adobe or Microsoft or Apple, etc. So it'll be interesting to see. But I appreciate all your talk there, and let's go ahead and transition. So the way that we see this problem, the fact that security products have vulnerabilities, they have ways around them, you can bypass them. We've known about hundreds of different bypass techniques for security products for the better part of 10, 15 years at least. And so what Gary does is, of course, takes a look at all of the evidence and artifacts that are collected by our forensics and incident response team and understands exactly what it means. Does it, if it looks and smells and walks like a duck, is it a duck, or is it something else? Is it a swan? Is it something different that the bad guys wanted you to think it was, but it really isn't, and there's something more to it, something more to discover and analyze. And so Gary's going to talk about why our current security solutions fail by looking at the artifacts and really determining what's going on. So with that, Gary, have at it.
Awesome. Well, first I wanted to say hello to the Hacking Exposed community. It's nice to meet you. I hope we can continue talking as time goes on.
Oh yeah, you're going to be talking about it.
It's they say about volunteering, right? One quick disclaimer too. I might have slight pauses in speaking as I switch between slides, just to give the slides a chance to catch up. with varying degrees of bandwidth out there. Anyways, so yes, continuing on. Modeling artifacts for forensic detection. I'm sure everybody who's looking at this slide is wondering how in the world does this fit into the topic, A, why security solutions fail, and B, following on a discussion of exploitation of security products specifically. What you'll see very quickly here is that we're actually going to get to the heart of some of the biggest failures that security products as a whole, and even to a large extent our industry, contain. So moving on there. So one of the topics of conversation that have been going around for quite some time in the industry is the topic of accuracy in products. We frequently hear that products are around 30 to 50% effective, meaning that they catch what they're intended to be looking for. And as we saw just now in the previous few slides, is that it goes beyond just an issue of accuracy and technology and how they implement it to begin with, but even the products themselves can be exploited, and of course, that leads to what we're talking about here, failures. But when we talk about that word failure, I want to sort of level set and define what we mean. Why does a failure matter in the first place? And really, it comes down to the concept of false negatives in a security product, right? That's what it's all about. When you have an attack, when you have a successful exploit, when you have a compromise, you have command and control activity, whatever the case is, when you have data being exfiltrated, and none of that is detected in any of the broad range of products that you have on your network, that's a failure. And what we see on a massive scale is that it's not just failure in individual products, but it's a systemic failure. When an attack can go from reconnaissance to attack to compromise to gaining foothold, command and control, and full exfiltration of data with no detection, that's a massive problem. That is a failure of the highest order. So it's not just a problem. Here we go. So it's not just a problem of false negatives, but even as we saw in the previous few slides, exploitation of the products themselves. So what we're talking about there is that even security products can increase your surface area that's available to an attacker, increase avenues of exploitation. So really what we get a sense of very quickly is that there's almost unlimited opportunity for attackers to get into a network, to laterally move around, and ultimately achieve their goals, which in the most, I guess it depends on the industry you work in, but a lot of times, most certain cases can be exfiltration of intellectual property or high value data, high monetary value data. So what we see when we combine all these topics of surface area and the almost innumerable avenues of exploitation and just the unbelievably terrible detection rate in the industry, which has pretty much been there since the beginning, is we have to come to grips with the fact that compromises will happen. You will be compromised. You have been compromised. We know this. We do this day in and day out, and then this is old news to everybody who's been doing this for any sort of time. So we move on from there. We say, okay, fine. Compromises will happen. I can't prevent them. I can't, lock, stock, prevent them. What can you do about them? And what you can do, and what we'll discuss briefly and from a slightly technical perspective, is refocusing some energy from wholly trying to prevent compromises to rapid detection and remediation, or reducing that post-compromise window of opportunity. So if we assume that compromises will happen, let's not give them the chance to achieve the goal, to get the intellectual property, the high-value data. Let's stop it immediately after it happens. And I think that is a very achievable goal for the industry and organizations to focus on. But as the slide says there's a catch. All right, so this kind of goes back a little bit to the topic of accuracy in products, and a lot of times, you know, the antivirus industry gets singled out here as, you know, signature-based detection, et cetera, right? You know, we're looking for known patterns, and the reality is it's not just an antivirus industry problem, and it's not even just a prevention industry problem, prevention part of the InfoSec industry, but even the response and forensics and detection and analytics portions of the industry actually rely on the exact same methodologies that antivirus has been using for decades now, and that is signature-based detection. That's a secret that, you know, just needs to be aired out now. As much marketing as you hear about, you know, all types of other things out there, a lot of it comes down to, almost all it comes down to, signature-based detection. But signature-based detection is, like it says here, a very misleading term. It's actually one that we've really tried to get away from recently using, because it's so non-specific, and it's also very useful when it's useful, right? When it works, it's great. So what I have up here is an example from another product that is used in the forensics incident response space, and this is a way of finding some pretty sophisticated malware, but it's using this concept of, you know, what we might see as signatures. Really, it's direct artifacts. So direct artifact is a term that I like much better now. And when we talk about direct artifacts, what we mean are indicators that require you to have direct access to whatever it is you're analyzing, you know, whatever it is in question, which in 9 times out of 10 we mean malware. But if you look at the example here, we see MD5, you know, checksums, and we have file names, and we have some what you might call structural anomalies of the executable files. Checksum is 0, contains end of file data. Again, all of these things are direct artifacts, meaning you have to have direct access to that file. You have to be able to see it, recover it, touch it, you know, feel it. If it's been deleted or removed or is hidden beyond your capability of finding it, too bad. You don't get to see it, you don't get to find it, you don't get any benefit of having knowledge about what to do with it or capture it or stop it. And this is what leads to, I think, a lot of these accuracy issues that we see across the industry. It's this focus not on signature-based detection, but on direct artifacts, directly attributable artifacts to the files we're looking at. Actually, another good example here, by the way, are intelligence feeds. This is kind of a funny one. I just read a report, I think it was yesterday morning, talking about the average intelligence feed being 10 to 15% was the range they gave it, 10 to 15% accurate. So of the 100% of the amount of time you spend looking at intelligence feeds, which, by the way, are supposed to be a feed of all the known bad stuff out there, right? It's supposed to make things easier. Actually, 85 to 90% of the time you deal looking at that data is actually a waste of time, with 10 to 15% payoff, and of course it depends on, you know, when it's accurate as to even, you know, balancing the expense of that cost benefit of those types of things to begin with. But again, intelligence feeds, not picking on them specifically, they are direct artifacts. Probably, you know, an example, at least from the network perspective, as direct as you can get, a very specific IP address or domain or, you know, type of file name going across the network. So if direct artifacts are a problem from a holistic perspective, how do we, you know, what's the alternative there? And the alternative is a term that we just started using or addressing, called consequential artifacts. So consequential artifacts, as described here, are typically, not always, but typically, most of the time, created by the operating system and not created by the malware itself. And that's the important part here. Leveraging consequential artifacts are a way of finding issues without direct observation of what it is you're trying to find in the first place. Sounds kind of counterintuitive, but it's actually extremely powerful, because in all the instances where the malware is so well hidden that the tools you're using to observe them can't see it, or the malware has been cleaned up and it's been some degree of time, there are still an enormous number of artifacts out there that you can use actually both in real time to detect compromises taking place in the first place, as well as long after the compromise has occurred, to piece things together. So we're going to look at two examples. All right, so we're going to look at two examples here. The first one's a very simple example and very common. If there's anyone on this call who's done incident response or forensics for any length of time, you've definitely dealt with prefetch files. The second one we're going to look at is a really fun one. It's UAC application setup detection. Now, I'm just going to give a very high overview of it. What we're going to discuss is pretty much unknown in the industry right now, and it's just a topic I'm really excited about, so I wanted to present it to you guys. But in the next week or two, we should be putting up a blog post that describes this in much more detail, specifically the UAC application setup information, since there is no information out there on it. The blogs I'm referring to, by the way, is the Cylance technical blog, and we have a handful of blogs up there that relate to a lot of these topics already, actually. So prefetch. For those who are not familiar with prefetch, if we take a step back and you're on an operating system, say Windows specifically, since we're talking about prefetch, when you run an application, you start up an application, it's actually a very complex process that takes place there. The application loader reads in the application. It has to parse it out. It has to page all the DLLs that application links to. It needs to go through and map all the individual imports that you import from all these different DLLs. Any other files that the application requires, such as configuration files or logging files, needs to set up those on the file system if they're not there, or if they are there, recover them and allow the application to interact with them properly. So a lot of activity happens before the application actually starts executing whatever it is it was developed to do. Now, part of the problem actually with that is it could take a very long time to start up applications every time you start up. And if you think about starting up the operating system, it has to do this for a large number of applications. So it could take very long to start an operating system, much less just an individual application. So one of the solutions to that is prefetch, or Microsoft introduced as the prefetcher. And long story short, what happens is the very first time an application runs, the operating system pays attention to every file that a particular application interacts with, so that the next time it basically moves all of that data to the system cache, where it loads everything asynchronously and doesn't have to do it in such an ordered fashion as it does it the first time. It leads to enormous speed improvements, but also it leads to a lot of benefits to us from the InfoSec perspective. And again, the incident response forensics space has been using this knowledge for a little while now. So we can look at prefetch files and kind of break them into two parts. One is a listing of the files themselves. So I have a very small snippet here of a particular system that was actually compromised. And what we see here is a listing of the actual prefetch files. They reside in, on most systems, a DC Windows/prefetch directory. You'll see a lot of prefetch files in there. Those prefetch files have the file name, of course, as we see. The name of the file indicates the name of the application that was run. The next string of digits there is a hash of the directory that the application was run from, and then the .pf extension for prefetch. In this particular display, we also see it's already resolved for us the actual path that the program was run from. Inside prefetch files, it keeps a run count, so we can see how many times these applications have been run, which can become very interesting for us from a detection perspective, as well as the last runtime, which is obviously very useful from a forensics and incident response perspective. All right, so this is the high level. Now within the files themselves, we also get, all right, there it comes up. We also get a list of the individual files that that particular application interacted with. So of course, as you would expect to see, there's going to be a lot of DLLs in there, all the standard DLLs that most applications tend to interact with. This is great because we also see if the application imports some custom or special DLLs that seem to be in odd spaces. We'll see them there too. Now, if we look at that top bar, I have a particular file highlighted, acrotray, the prefetch file for acrotray. Now, there's a few things that are really interesting about that. First of all, if you look at the file extensions for all the files around it, they all have a .exe extension. Of course, executables tend to have exe extensions. Now, if you see an executable run without an exe extension, in this case, there's no extension, but sometimes we see .jpeg or .bitmap or .text or all kinds of things in there. That's obviously, if you're seeing a prefetch file for a .jpeg, something is enormously wrong. Just as much as if you see no extension, because the operating system doesn't know what to do with that file. So something special happened to make that application run. Now inside there, it's also pointing out other interesting files to us, in addition to the potential or likely malware itself, as well as batch files and things like that. Because the way this works is it actually keeps track of all the files that this particular process interacts with for the first typically 30 seconds. This is very useful in the case of keyloggers, a lot of data exfiltration tools. You can see right in here what that application is interacting with. And so, of course, this is a huge amount of information that we're gathering from looking at talking about one specific topic here, prefetch. And I probably went on and on about it too much, so I apologize. The point here, though, is that we don't know if this is Zeus or GoBot or insert malware family here, some custom APT example. It doesn't matter, right? Because understanding the fine differences between those typically lead to you looking for direct artifacts or needing to recover it itself. If we step back and just care about consequential artifacts, what we find is that the operating itself keeps an enormous amount of data that we can use for analysis, again, in real time, as well as post-mortem analysis to make decisions on very quickly. So this is just the prefetch files. I'm going to move on from here and briefly describe the UAC application setup detection. Now this one is probably one of the most complex, I think, examples of consequential artifact analysis that we've done. It's also definitely my favorite right now. And I love this picture, by the way. It's very fitting. A lot of people look at this and kind of think of the tiger being malware and the little piece of meat being the operating system. But it's entirely the opposite interpretation would be correct there. You put this little application, this little piece of malware, a couple thousand lines of code on an enormously complex operating system, and you can expect a lot of activity to ensue that we can use to our advantage, that we need to start using to our advantage more. So UAC, most people are familiar with UAC, which is user access control. Short story on that is the modern versions of Windows have introduced much stricter access control around files, directories, objects, and things like that. And that's why we now tend to see, most of the time when you find malware and you are dealing with compromises, most of the interesting attacker-related files that you tend to find are in the user directories or user temporary directories. That revolves around UAC and the restrictions on system directories that exist now. If you remember, if you're around 10, 15 years ago, the best way to look for malware is to look in system 32. That's not so much the case anymore, and UAC is a big reason for that. So things get interesting with, hit the next key here. All right. So with user access control now, restricting access to so many parts of the operating system, yet there's still so many legacy applications out there. The operating system has to try to manage that for applications. So applications that try to install themselves into places where they really don't have permission to. Specifically, you see it with applications trying to write files to System32, and a lot of times, a lot of people have experienced, even with legitimate applications, they try to write log files and things like that, even to the program files directory where they're normally installed. All of those directories have restricted access that normal user processes shouldn't be able to access, and of course it depends on the context of even non-user processes. So there are correction mechanisms in there, part of UAC, to allow those programs to run properly. And one of those has to do with virtualization. So when the operating system detects that an application is trying to write data to a place that it doesn't have access to, it'll virtualize a directory for it, invisibly, on the back end. And that may or may not cause problems for the application, but more interestingly, from an InfoSec perspective, what it does do is it lights up events in the event logs. Event logs go crazy. For a single piece of malware that ends up being hidden really well and inaccessible to user land applications, we can see literally hundreds, if not thousands, of event log entries for a single application that, according to status quo detection, looking for direct artifacts is totally undetectable. However, when we step back and we look at this from a consequential artifact perspective, and really when I say this, I'm talking about the failure of InfoSec industry as a whole, we see that a lot of this activity should stand out like a sore thumb. And it does. It does if you look for it correctly. So again, on this particular topic, I know we have somewhat of a cryptic screenshots up here, but we are going to elaborate in much, much more detail on that in the coming weeks on the Cylance blog. Moving on here. So finally, if we kind of wrap this all together, you know, what we really want to get across here is that compromises are guaranteed. Old news. Anybody who's been working in this industry for more than 2 weeks knows that. And it's why it happens is a very complex issue. A big part of it, though, is because of the multitude of ways that products fail. And again, by fail we mean false negatives, right? Don't tell you that there's a problem when there's actually a problem. The majority of these failures stem from a technical perspective, stem from the focus on direct artifacts. To deal with that, we need to decrease post-compromise window of opportunity. And we do that, and I think at the same time solve a lot of problems and failures in the industry by refocusing on consequential artifacts, which is a slightly more difficult problem to look at, but still very doable. You know, it's funny is if you take the average system administrator, they could look at a lot of these things and wonder how we're not detecting them, how we're not seeing it. And so part of this is also the marriage of skill sets that typically have resided outside the InfoSec space, but I think we're doing a great job of doing that. And that's probably a whole nother topic to talk about at a different time.
So, gosh, thanks, Gary. I love that topic because consequential artifact analysis to me is really the future of where collection is going. I mean, you can't always gain direct access, and even if you do, it's a temporal state that that doesn't afflict the consequential analysis piece as greatly as it does the direct. And so, being able to be experts at that, and then also being able to do it for very, very large data sets and large number of systems, to me makes it just a huge compelling way of going about forensic analysis. So I love this. I can't wait till the UAC deep dive, the blog comes out. So to go to the blog, you can check us out at cylance.com and go to Labs, technical blog. You can also find us, of course, Hacking Exposed on Twitter and at hackingexposed.com. Hack Exposed Live on YouTube, and you can also send any requests that you have for topic ideas into info@hackingexposed.com, and then you can find us on LinkedIn, of course, with Cylance. So let's do a quick Q&A. If you have any questions, just find the questions tab in the little control panel that you should have up, and feel free to start firing away some questions, and we'll start taking a look at them and see what we can answer.
I see a couple questions here. I'll just jump in with. One question is, please have the presenters speak to the effectiveness of a whitelisting strategy. This is probably more opinion, I guess, but whitelisting is extremely effective. In the vast majority of cases, it's incredibly effective. Around 2000, 2001, 2002 timeframe, I think we saw a large surge in applications that work that way. Cisco, if I remember right, acquired Okina, that leveraged a lot of strategies like that. And at the time, I was an enormous fan of things like that. But I think what we found, or what the industry found, was that the management of those strategies are incredibly difficult. And because of that, in any, even small enterprise, the products weren't used, I think, to the full sort of whitelist capability that they.
Yeah, as myself, in my former life, acquiring these companies, selling these technologies, building this technology, there is a place absolutely for whitelisting solutions, but they tend to be on systems or endpoints that do not change much at all. If you can find, let's say, an ATM system that's buried in a closet for 4 years and never touched, okay, that makes sense. You can find a Windows C or embedded system that never gets, updated, manipulated, etc., and you can't simply touch it. A whitelisting solution works. The problem, in my mind, with the whitelisting model is that it truly relies on trust, by and large. You trust that this binary is good. You trust that it came from Microsoft. Well, it must be good. You trust it from Adobe because it must be good. It's from Adobe. But you actually don't know. You don't know if it's good. And so if I can fake you into believing that my exe is or PDF is trusted, then you're going to open it. And that application whitelisting solution is going to allow it to be opened. And all I have to do is either steal a private cert and start signing stuff, or make it look a whole heck of a lot like it's a trusted application by a trusted developer or manufacturer or vendor. And so that, I think, to me, is the Achilles heel on the whitelisting solution. I mean, also, to your point, Gary, about just the management of those things can be very, very difficult. And in a highly structuredized, framework in a larger company, I think it might work. Otherwise, it could be really, really challenging. Okay, let's see. A couple more.
In fact, just to add to what you were saying, in fact, this example which I gave a while back, the MD5 collision and faking the Microsoft certificate, so that's a big challenge. In fact, in security, relying on a single solution means breaking that thing. If you can just break it by some means, that makes it completely vulnerable. So any solution which is just a whitelisting or just a blacklisting or just a statistical solution doesn't really work. I think it's a good combination of multiple things. That's what makes a security system a lot more stronger, and that reduces the chances of breaking it.
Well, Bikash brings up a good point, and that is that even whitelisting solutions are going to have vulnerabilities. I mean, I can tell you personally and firsthand, in deploying hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of nodes of whitelisting, that it absolutely happens. So, having said all that, so our next question from Ralph is, hey, is there no standard governing security appliances, like you hear about FIPS and NIST standards, or even common criteria? I'll throw that in there. Do they not address these kinds of vulnerabilities as much as you're exposed by federal standards? I will tell you that almost none of these solutions really do any kind of justice around finding vulnerabilities in hardware or software solutions and platforms. They really are more checkbox items. For example, FIPS 180 is really just around cryptographic usage and algorithms and making sure that it's strong if you do try to encrypt. And NIST standards are usually around the control flow and design of an application rather than specifically around, how do you call a particular function in Windows, C++, or in Java, or, how are input variables handled and sanitized and validated. And unfortunately, there is really no solid standard or framework that allows a development member to follow. You often have to go through training and classes that offer those up and read a ton.
Another thing, Stuart, that is regarding the compliances and the standards, one very serious challenge which I see is how these standards and guidelines are being used. Now, we can't probably completely blame it on the standards. Like suppose if I give you, say, revolver, that's to protect yourself, but you take the revolver and shoot it, you point to your head and you shoot it, shoot yourself. That's not the right usage of a revolver, right? So what people try to do is they try to use these compliances and the standards as a tool to sell. These tools were supposed to be used in the right manner to secure yourself. But the question is how many organizations treat the compliances in that way. They just treat it like a tool. They use it to sell products, to show to the customer that they're secure, and they're not using the tools effectively to secure themselves. I think that's the biggest challenge. And that running for compliance is the biggest challenge. We should not run for compliance. We should run for security. That should be the goal. But for us, many a times the goal becomes compliance. Compliance is just the path and not the goal. So that's probably the biggest challenge in terms of the way industry is handling this.
Yeah, Bikash makes a good point. At the end of the day, most companies only respond when their house is on fire, right? And usually house on fire means in their world that they've been found non-compliant. So they become very compliance-centric, which compliance, as we all know, does not equal security in any which way, shape, or form. And so you end up missing the boat. So the last question, and then we'll wrap up, guys. What are some good resources to help me become a true security expert? As a general rule, as we always recommend, obviously read as much as you possibly can. The Hacking Exposed series obviously does a pretty good job on the prevent side of finding the vulnerabilities before the bad guys do. Also, get up to speed and read a lot around incident response and forensics and intelligence gathering and things of that nature. There's a lot of resources on the web, but also books on it these days. Just try and stay up to date with a lot of the webinars that we do, but also the blogs that we and others put out. There's a wealth of resources out there to help you keep up to speed on all the latest and greatest bad guys. So, and also, I think I'll leave you with one thought, and that is with all of these threats, every single threat out there today, that none of them are new. We've not seen anything new since the first buffer overflow in my book. And everything else has been pretty much the same rinse and repeat issues. And the real gap in my book is adequately putting the control, mitigating countermeasures, and fixing and patches that need to happen to prevent the attacks that we're seeing today. If we did simply that top 5 list, along with strong passwords, of course, and removing backdoor useless accounts, things of that nature, maybe a top 5 or 10 list, you would eliminate 90+% of all the attack surface area for the bad guy, and you would be able to secure yourself within a reasonable expectation. So listen, with that, I want to thank you, Bikash. Thank you, Gary. Thanks, everybody, for joining. I appreciate it. Look forward to the next webinar in the next month or so, and safe hunting. Take care, guys. Bye.
Thank you. Thank you, Gary. Thank you, Stuart. Thanks, everybody who joined us today. Thank you.
Thanks. All right, thanks. Bye.